So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kellen Chaporik. I'm the Environmental Program Manager with Lakeland Agricultural Research Association. A little bit about LARA. We conduct innovative, unbiased applied research and extension supporting sustainable agriculture in northeastern Alberta. I'm really happy to have Janice with us. She's a food safety specialist with the food safety branch with Alberta government. She's going to be talking all about on-farm slaughter operations and what you need to know. So I'm going to hand it over to Janice.
Great. Well, hello, everybody, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share with you today. Today, I'm going to talk to you about the on-farm slaughter operation. I'm going to just turn off my camera here while I'm presenting, so just give me a second here. Okay. The on-farm slaughter operation license and what you need to know. This is an interesting license. This is a great license that's offered through the Alberta Meat and Dairy Inspection Section. We have approximately 400 licenses that are issued throughout the province right now. So let's get started. So today I'm going to brief you on a quick overview on the scope of the on-farm slaughter operation license, and I'll share some of the more popular questions and answers that we're receiving in the department. Then I'll outline some of the recent amendments to the meat inspection regulation that benefits the OFSOs. And then next we'll step away from the OFSO for a bit, and I'll cover what you need to know in order to sell cuts of meat directly from your farm. So please note that this is outside of the scope of the OFSO, and you cannot sell meat that results from an OFSO slaughter. And then finally, I'll answer your questions at the end. So if something's unclear to you during this presentation, please make a note of it and we'll discuss it afterwards. The on-farm slaughter operation license, or the OFSO license, is an interesting flexible license and it covers a wide range of activities. So let's take a moment to explore these opportunities and how you may use the OFSO license in your operation. If you have an OFSO license or you've had one for a while, some of this information will be familiar to you, but stay with us because there's some new information at the end as well. So under previous legislation, Albertans who didn't own farmland couldn't have an animal slaughtered in the field for consumption by their household. And the Minister of Agriculture and Forestry and Rural Economic Development, that's a mouthful. Minister of Agriculture, Forestry and Rural Economic Development, or AFRED, heard this complaint loud and clear. So when updates were made to the meat inspection regulation in July 2020, we wrote an amendment that would allow non-farm owners the opportunity to purchase a live animal and have their animals slaughtered without the need to transport them to another location, possibly minimizing the stress and the chance of injury to the animal. So under this new license, any Albertan can buy an animal, have it slaughtered and processed on farm for consumption by their household. So this increases the availability of local meat for all Albertans, as well as increasing new business opportunities for livestock producers. The license is held by the owner of the land where the animal will be slaughtered, not the customer who owns or purchases the live animal. Under previous legislation, this was only permitted for people who own both the live animal as well as the land where the slaughter occurred, i.e. this opportunity only existed for farmers. So the OFSO allows you to sell a live animal to a customer for the purpose of slaughter. Now, this may seem like a technicality, but it enables this license to work with other pieces of legislation. So it's important to note that in this process, you as the holder of the OFSO license are selling the live animal and providing the slaughter services. You're not selling the meat that results from it, as the sale of uninspected meat is prohibited in Alberta. Now, you'll hear me repeat this often in today's presentation, so please bear with me when I say you cannot sell uninspected meat, as this is a very important point. So the end result is indeed increased availability of local meat for all Albertans, as well as new business opportunities for livestock producers. The license provides farmers in Alberta the opportunity to oversee the whole operation, from the sale of their live animal through to field slaughter and the processing for the customers. It really is a true gate to plate process. So the OFSO operator, the license holder, is responsible for the overall operation and owns, leases, or controls the land where everything takes place. They may conduct the slaughter themselves, or they may hire someone else to do it, or the customer might conduct the slaughter. It really doesn't matter who performs the slaughter, as long as it is done safely and humanely. So remember that the intent of this license is to enable field slaughter. This means that the slaughter must be done outdoors. It cannot be done inside a building, otherwise it meets the definition of abattoir. And the operation would have to meet all of the requirements of the Meat Inspection Act and regulation, including inspection services to conduct the ante and postmortem inspections. It's worth mentioning here that it's not necessary for the customer to be present at the slaughter. The OFSO can store the meat for them, and then the customer can pick it up at their convenience. One thing that's really important to keep in mind is that the animals don't have to originate from the OFSO land to be slaughtered there. So your customers can bring their own animals for slaughter, and there's no limit to how many animals can be slaughtered and processed by an OFSO. Therefore, this license allows agricultural groups such as 4-H to conduct a field slaughter without having to apply for an exemption to the Alberta Meat Inspection Regulation. Within the scope of the OFSO license, you can offer and conduct processing activities for the carcasses from the animals that you slaughtered, only if the processing site is on the same land as the slaughter site, and are both included in your license. The processing must be done, again, in a safe, sanitary manner. Appropriate temperatures and other conditions must be met to maintain the product's safety. Additionally, slaughter and processing must be separated from incompatible activities that could present risks, like contamination from chemicals or a source of bacteria like manure, or perhaps the introduction of physical hazards like wood splinters or metal filings, or even the introduction of other food ingredients that could cause an allergic reaction. The OFSO license holder oversees the slaughter and processing activities, and AFRED does not inspect any part of it, though we will follow up on complaints and implement consequences such as license suspension and fines if that's warranted. There are a few options for the processing, and we'll look at them closer in a few minutes during the Q&A section. Here's a brief overview of the slaughter and processing activities that fall within the scope of the OFSO license. Please note that all of the waste from these activities must be disposed of as per the disposal of dead animal regulation and the specified risk materials. A link to these two regulations can be found on our OFSO webpage. So slaughter includes rendering the animal unconscious, bleeding, eviscerating, removing the head, feet, and hide, and it's all done outside. And the processing includes any or all of the following, whichever products you want to offer. It can be cutting, wrapping, grinding, curing, and making meat products like jerky or sausage, all done on the same premises as the slaughter. Now, if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from today's presentation, please let it be this point. The sale of uninspected meat is illegal in Alberta, and all meat resulting from an OFSO slaughter is uninspected and it cannot be sold. The regulation states that it can neither be bartered, given away, or otherwise transferred, and that it is for the sole consumption by the household of the individuals who owned the live animal. So the meat is limited to the household of the animal owners, and they're identified on the quarterly report forms. A carcass cannot be shared beyond the owners. And the reason for this is that risks do exist with the consumption of uninspected meat. And the government of Alberta is striking a fine balance between allowing these new slaughter options while mitigating the risks by controlling the extent to which the meat can be distributed. Or in other words, limiting how many people would be affected by consuming the product if a foodborne illness outbreak were to occur. Another important note worth mentioning right here is that the OFSO operator is limited to processing the meat from the slaughter only, and it cannot be supplemented with meat from elsewhere, including inspected meat. However, if the carcass goes to an inspected facility for processing, then the inspected meat can be incorporated with the uninspected meat to make products like sausage. But the processed product must still go back to the original individual customer, and it cannot be sold or given away as the carcass was not inspected at slaughter. Another important note is labeling. You must communicate to the customer that the carcass and the meat has not been inspected. And as such, each carcass and or package of meat must be labeled with this information. Additionally, the name of the OFSO and the date is really important for traceability purposes. Should there ever be an incident that would require your customer to go into their freezer to identify the meat. And before we move on to the questions, here's one more important note: slaughter without stunning. So the OFSO is a very good fit for slaughter that doesn't have the stunning step, which is used in many of the religious slaughter rituals such as halal or kosher. So stunning of the animal prior to slaughter is an animal handling requirement under the meat inspection regulation. So when this alternative to the step is done, it must be explained in the application form, and special considerations are granted. There's a template that can be filled out and submitted with the application, and it basically just asks for information on how the animal is restrained prior to slaughter, and also what the backup plan is if the animal does not lose consciousness after the next cut. So as I mentioned, there's a template for this part of the application. Note that it does take a couple extra days to approve this process, the slaughter without stunning. And when you look on your application form, you'll see a box for the SWS. If you're not interested in slaughter without stunning, don't click that box because it will just delay your application approval process. So those are the highlights of the license and how you can use it. Now, I manage our food safety email inbox and info line, and there are many questions coming in regarding this new license. So we like these questions because it means that people are asking for the information before proceeding and potentially doing something that's not following the regulation. So here are a few of the most common questions and the requests for clarification that we're receiving. So just a heads up, the prohibition on the sale of uninspected meat will come up a few times. Question number 1. If customer buys a pig from me and I slaughter it, can they sell the meat? Now, I'm pretty sure that you can answer this question by now. No. I think we covered this. However, I'd like to emphasize that the meat has not been inspected and cannot be distributed. It's only for consumption by the household who own the live animal, and it cannot be shared or sold. It cannot be sold to friends, not at a farmer's market, not in a store, not to a restaurant. It cannot be sold at all. Even if the carcass has been processed at an inspected facility, it cannot be sold because remember, the slaughter itself was not inspected, therefore no sale, and also no sharing or no giving away and no bartering. Number 2, now you may have been on our website and seen the mobile butcher license and asked yourself, okay, so how is this different from an OFSO? It's all about who owns the land where the slaughter occurs relative to who owns the animal. So for example, if the customer owns the animal and the land, it's a mobile butcher slaughter service. If the customer owns the animal but not the land, it's an on-farm slaughter operation service. So the person who performs the slaughter on an OFSO doesn't need to have the license themselves. It's all conducted under the umbrella of the OFSO, and additional licensing for slaughter is not required. So to recap, if you hire a mobile butcher to conduct the OFSO slaughter, which you can, why is it under the OFSO license and not the mobile butcher license? Because a mobile butcher can only slaughter on the producer's land, and the OFSO operator is no longer the producer once the animal has been sold. So the customer who bought the animal now becomes the producer, as the title of producer transfers with ownership of the animal. The mobile butcher license is not new. It's been around for years, but it didn't allow the average Albertan to buy an animal and have it slaughtered on farm. And this is the technicality that we had to work through in the creation of this new license to allow the animal owner to slaughter on someone else's land. Now, a note about hiring a mobile butcher for an OFSO. You might be thinking, okay, so they're both licensed, uninspected slaughter. Does it really matter who fills out the report? Well, it just does on our end to keep our statistics straight. So to prevent the submission of duplicate reports from an OFSO and a mobile butcher, we ask that the quarterly reports be completed just once and under the appropriate license. One more thing before we move on to simplify things and hopefully not complicate it further. A producer who slaughters their animals themselves on their land for consumption by their household does not need either license. A producer can slaughter for their family without a license. And of course, this meat is uninspected and it cannot be sold. Question number 3, who can process the carcass following the OFSO slaughter? Well, this decision is for the customer to make, and they have 3 options for processing. They are: 1, the OFSO can process if they have the skill and equipment, and if it happens to be on the same land as their slaughter operation. This includes keeping the equipment clean, storing the meat at the proper temperatures and conditions, and to ensure that it's free from spoilage and contamination. It also means that the water used for processing and cleaning must be potable, that is, clean drinking water. Or if the customer would rather process their own carcass, they can take it home with them. In this case, the OFSO is no longer responsible for the safety or quality of the meat, nor how it's handled, and it's advisable to include a statement to this effect in your contract with your customers, just to close the loop on your accountability. I mentioned a contract here. Although it's not required under regulation, it is a good practice because it gives you that place to document your agreement that you have with your customer, such as if they take the carcass away without processing, then you are not accountable for the quality or safety of the processing. Or if you do the processing, you can state the type of processing that will be done, how much sausage, how much ground meat, for example, and what all of the costs are. It just lends transparency. And it gives you a place to document your kill date, your customer contact information, and all the sort of information that's required for your quarterly reports. Or option number 3, your customer can take the carcass to a licensed third party, including an AFRED abattoir or a mobile butcher facility, or to an Alberta Health Services permitted butcher shop. So once a third party becomes involved in the operation, or someone other than the OFSO operator and the customer, then the processing must occur at a licensed premises. So I highly recommend that you make these arrangements in advance, as capacity at these facilities is limited and they might not be able to accommodate you or your customer on the spot if you show up with a carcass. And this is our last prepared question. So question number 4, how many animals can I slaughter per year with an OFSO license? This question comes in quite often. To be clear, you can have as many customers as you can serve, and you may slaughter as many animals as you wish. There's only a limit on how many animals of each species you can slaughter per customer. So these are the limits. I think the confusion comes from the wording that's used in the regulation, because it states that these are the limits for the producer. So if you read through the regulation, keep in mind that the term producer always refers to the owner of the animal. So whether it's the person who just bought the animal and is having it slaughtered, or the person who raised the livestock, whoever owns the animal at that point in time is the producer. So once you sell the animal, your customer is the producer. And these are the annual limits for the OFSO and the mobile butcher customers. And they represent an estimated amount of meat that an individual's household would consume per year. The limit is based on the average household. So if the need is greater, they simply apply to the director of meat inspection for an exemption. But note that these limits are cumulative in case you're asked by your customers. That means 6 large red meat animals and 12 hogs and 12 goats and 12 sheep and 150 small animals per household. There's no limit on how many customers an OFSO can have or how many animals they can slaughter on their site, only a limit on how many animals a customer can have slaughtered. There are limits, however, to how many chickens or turkeys you can sell without purchasing quota. And they are up to 2,000 broiler chickens per year and up to 300 turkeys per year. So in December 2021, last December, the regulation was amended again, and there were 3 changes that directly affect the usage of the OFSO license. So I believe these amendments are all welcomed by OFSO license holders. So I'd like to explain them now. Broadly speaking, here are the 3 amendments. 2 of the changes, the co-ownership and the bait, were made to the meat inspection regulation. And the 3rd one, the disposal, was a ministerial order made under the disposal of dead animal regulation. So let's review each of these changes individually. Change number 1, effective December 2021, large animals can be co-owned by up to 4 individuals, and the meat from the carcass is shared by their households. So this is for large animals with a live weight of more than 227 kg or 500 pounds. Animals weighing less than 227 kg cannot be shared and are still subject to the one owner policy. This co-ownership, this is not species specific, but it's based on the live weight of the animal. And it's intended to allow for larger animals such as cattle, bison, elk, for example. It's not necessary to weigh the animal. You don't have to buy a scale. It's just an estimate of the animal's weight is sufficient for co-ownership. So it therefore follows that the meat from a co-owned animal is shared by the owners, and the amount that is shared among them is decided entirely by the co-owners, i.e. they don't have to be, it doesn't have to be a 50-50 or 25-25-25-25 share. The amount that each owner takes is not reported on your quarterly reports. Only the names and the contact information for each co-owner is recorded. And a new quarterly report templates have been created to allow for you to enter more than one owner. Okay, so the left side, what changed, is basically what we saw on the previous slide, worded slightly different. The large animals can be shared by co-owners, and there's a maximum of 4 co-owners allowed per large animal. And the new report template has space for the contact information of each co-owner. Now, what didn't change is that the small animals, less than 227 kg, are owned by 1 individual. And many of our OFSO licensees also have a mobile butcher license that allows them to slaughter on their customer's land. So please note that the co-ownership and sharing of meat has not been extended to these animals. Mobile butcher customers are still unable to share their animals as that meat is solely for the consumption by their household. So at this point, I'd just like to reiterate that all meat from an OFSO slaughter is uninspected and none of it can be distributed beyond the owners of the animals. So that means that this new co-ownership does not enable further distribution of the meat. It all still stays within the households of the owners for consumption. Change number 2, slaughter waste as bait. This change was intended to reduce the amount of waste per carcass and to provide an opportunity for increased economic benefit for the OFSO because they can sell it for direct profit. It also enables additional source of bait for hunters and trappers. And the slaughter waste consists of butcher scraps and byproducts. So note that the OFSO it's the OFSO that is enabled to sell the waste. The customer cannot sell any part of the carcass for bait. Under the regulation, the customer only gets their edible parts back, and the carcass, rest of the carcass, the operator is responsible for disposing of the waste, which they can now sell as bait. So the regulations provide specific labeling instructions, and each package must be identified with the words uninspected for use as bait only. What cannot be offered as bait is clearly outlined in section 3173 of the regulation, and you can refer to it for a complete list of the specified risk materials. It states it's stated as the skull, the brain, the trigeminal ganglia, the eyes, the palatine tonsils, the spinal cord, and the dorsal root ganglia. Also, the distal ileum of any aged bovine or any animal of any species that could have a reportable disease. And of course, the harvested meat from the carcass, as it's stated in the regulation that it belongs to the animal owner. Okay, so left side, what changed? Here again, a summary of the previous 2 slides. Slaughter waste as a direct and indirect economic benefit to the OFSO licensees. Now, what didn't change is that the uninspected meat cannot be sold. So the meat that is harvested from the carcass, all the edible meat must be returned to the owner of the carcass as per section 3141. None of these parts may be labeled and sold as bait. Again, the opportunity is to limit the OFSO license holders only. I'm sorry, the opportunity is limited to the OFSO license holders only. The mobile butchers cannot sell their slaughter waste for use as bait. And as always, the SRMs must be disposed of as per federal requirements. And change number 3. So even though this is not a change to the meat inspection regulation, the disposal of the dead animal regulation is referenced in the MIR, and there's another opportunity for the OFSOs to save some money on disposal costs. So I'd like to mention it here. Prior to this change, the OFSOs were required to dispose of their waste in the same manner as larger operations, and their options were limited to a class 1 or class 2 landfill, burning by incineration, composting at a class 1 compost facility, or rendering at a rendering plant, which was all costly. So now the OFSOs can dispose of their slaughter waste by on-farm burning, burial, and or farm composting. So those are the highlights of the license and how you can use it, including the latest amendments to the meat inspection regulation that affects the OFSOs. So this part of the presentation, the farm gate sales, is outside of the scope of the on-farm slaughter operation license. However, there's a lot of interest in this, and we receive a lot of questions from producers on how they can sell their meat from their farm gate. So let's take a look at how to conduct farm gate sales in contrast to on-farm slaughter operation. First thing you need to think about is inspection. So the Meat Inspection Act states that these requirements must be met before meat can be sold in Alberta. An ante-mortem inspection is done to assess the overall health of the animal and looking for injuries or neurological difficulties that would indicate a disease. This inspection, as well as the others, are all conducted by a government-appointed inspector. The slaughter occurs at an abattoir or establishment, both of which, of course, are defined in the legislation. And the post-mortem inspection involves an assessment of the internal organs, again, looking for signs of disease and inspecting the overall health of the animal. And if everything is good, the inspector deems the fully dressed carcass as fit for human consumption. So technically, you could take your animals to a federally licensed facility for inspection. However, the logistics don't really work because the large federal slaughterhouses aren't set up to return individual carcasses back to the producers on a small scale. So that really only leaves the provincial inspection system as your only option. So it's a matter of calling your licensed abattoir, booking a slaughter into their schedule. And then you would drop off your animal at the scheduled time, and the abattoir operator coordinates the inspection services with the government of Alberta. So the carcass passes an ante and postmortem inspections, and then it's been deemed fit for human consumption by one of our inspectors, and the carcass may be processed. The processing, which includes everything from cutting and wrapping to grinding, sausage making, smoked products, all of it must take place in an inspected facility, either by Alberta's Meat and Dairy Inspection Section or else by an Alberta Health Services food inspector. So just as an aside, for processing, it's the facility that's inspected, not the product or the meat itself. So unlike the slaughter, that's where the animal and the meat is inspected, every single carcass. But in the facility inspection, the inspection only happens about 3 times a year. So most of the provincial abattoirs also have a processing license, and you can simply submit your cut instructions when you arrange the slaughter and then pick it up all wrapped and labeled and ready for sale. But note that the regulations specify that the inspected meat cannot be processed at an OFSO. Therefore, if you have an OFSO processing facility, it doesn't enable you to process your carcasses for sale. Or we had mentioned the mobile butcher license earlier, so I'd like to just circle back to this for a moment here. You'll recall that a mobile butcher license allows you to slaughter on someone else's land for their consumption. Well, if you have the mobile butcher license, then you can apply for the mobile butcher facility license to process those uninspected carcasses. And then you can sell processed inspected meat as well. So one more comparison slide. Wait, I'm just going to go back because I kind of think that is important. And I think I kind of just skipped over it real quickly. Mobile butcher facility, the slaughter is uninspected, but the processing itself is equivalent to an Alberta Health Services facility, and it's inspected. So if you're processing inspected carcasses, that meat can be sold. Okay, let's move on. Here, one more comparison slide, and it's in here. You can hold more than one license. In fact, you can have all 3 of those licenses for maximum flexibility in your business. They're each $100, each valid for a period of 5 years. So if you have all 3 of them, then you would do your on-site slaughter under your OFSO license. You could process it under your mobile butcher facility license. And these carcasses are uninspected and the meat cannot be sold. But you could purchase meat, or if you have an animal that's slaughtered at an inspected provincially licensed facility, then you can take that carcass back to your mobile butcher facility, process the meat, and then it can be sold. So you would have to just demonstrate clear segregation of inspected meat from uninspected meat. And of course, the uninspected meat could not be sold, but the inspected product could be. And the final piece to this farm gate sale puzzle is the product storage. So this is an Alberta Health Services permit that you may or you may not require. Since it's not one of our permits, it comes from AHS. The only advice that I can give you is to check with Alberta Health Services on whether or not you need one. So contact your local AHS office, tell them that you're doing farm gate sales of inspected meat, and they will determine if you need a storage permit for the meat. Sometimes they'll visit you and they'll inspect your storage conditions, but sometimes they'll just issue a permit over the phone. It varies, but do your due diligence by contacting them, and they will ask you about the cleanliness, the protection, and the segregation of the product and the storage temperatures. Sometimes they'll ask you to keep records of your storage temperatures. Now, that was quite a bit of information, and we have a lot of information available to help guide you through implementing this license. So this is the page that's dedicated to the on-farm slaughter operation on Alberta's meat inspection webpage. Here is the link. I think we can probably, I will send these links all to Kelly, and then she can post them with the recording if you, or distribute them. Or you can get in touch with me if you need more information. So this is the link. We created a technical guide with a lot of detail, 29 pages packed full of good information. So you can find that here. It also includes the template that you would be that you would need to fill out if you were doing the slaughter without stunning. And of course, contact us anytime. And here's our section email address. It's af.foodsafety@gov.ab.ca. Now, here we are. One more time before we wrap up today. Remember that the sale of uninspected meat is illegal in Alberta. All meat resulting from an OFSO is uninspected, therefore it cannot be sold. It cannot be bartered or given away, and it cannot be otherwise transferred. If you would like to sell meat packages from your farm gate, then the slaughter and the processing must be inspected. And I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to present this information today. So once everybody's ready, I'll answer your questions if there are any.
So there were a few questions that came in. The animal limit that you provided, that was per year, right?
Per year, the way it's stated in the legislation, per individual, so per Albertan.
Okay. So it's not per household then? It's per
That's
individual.
not actually the way it's written. It's kind of the way it's interpreted, but that's not the way it's written, per individual.
Okay. That's a good one. Another question came in. What happens to the offal?
The offal can be disposed of as anything inedible can be disposed of as per the dead animal regulation. So that's the burial, the composting or the burning. Or if it's edible offal, then it can go back with the carcass to the customer. So just if it's edible or inedible, it would go either way. Inedible, then it could be sold as bait as well.
Okay, another person said, just to check, if I take a live animal to a licensed butcher and they slaughter and process that themselves, it's considered inspected?
Yes. Yes, if the slaughter was inspected, if it's one of the Alberta agriculture, so Alberta, we just changed our ministry names, and it's such a long one. Alberta Agriculture, Forestry and Rural Economic Development, licensed facilities, then inspection is included with that slaughter. Alberta Health Services has meat facilities, butchers that just break down a carcass and process it. They don't do any slaughter, and if they did do any slaughter, it's not inspected. And so that would be uninspected meat. So it has to be inspected, the antemortem, postmortem inspection, deemed fit for human consumption, then processed at either place.
Is there a list available of inspected facilities?
There is. Alberta Health Services does not have a list, to my knowledge. We've asked them a number of times over the years, and they have so many. I think there are several thousand. We have. It's just shy of 700 facilities that are licensed. Now, some of those are inspected and some are uninspected. So we have a directory. If you wanted to contact me, I don't have it just was posted on our website last week. So I can't show you the exact location, but you can let me know. And you can break it down. You can sort it for inspected licenses, for abattoirs, for uninspected, for mobile butchers, mobile butcher facilities, on-farm slaughter operations. And then you can find one that's close to you from there.
Okay. Another question was, can slaughter waste be sold as pet treats?
No, that's federal regulation. It can only be sold as bait. And the federal regulation all falls under the CFIA. There is legislation. They have the Pet Food Act and Regulations. So nothing that is slaughtered under the on-farm slaughter operation can go in that direction. It's all federal. At this point, any pet food must be inspected by the federal government.
Okay. With sausage making, besides adding inspected meat, which is not allowed, can you add other ingredients?
Oh, yes. For the slaughter or the sausage that you're doing on your on-farm slaughter operation license, absolutely. It's just the meat. It can't be any inspected meat. Honestly, I don't know why. I don't have a good reason for you. That's just the regulation.
What happens if we apply for the permit and do not use it? Do we just fill out quarterly with 0 as quantity, or does it affect our day-to-day? So I guess what are the implications of it?
You'll be reminded if you don't fill it out. There's a little box that says no slaughter to report. So it's so simple. You just put in your name and your license number and your phone number, I think it is, and then no slaughter to report this quarter, and submit it. And that's all. If you don't, then they'll call you or email you, and they'll get on you to a point. If you still don't respond to their requests for your reports, then they will suspend your license. But you get ample warning.
So do these regulations then apply to on reserve farming operations?
No, the only time that the regulations apply on reserve is if they're selling meat off the reserve. So then it would have to be inspected because it's selling meat in Alberta. So it would have to be an inspected operation. But if the meat is all staying on the reserve, then a license is not required.
The question is, where would I find whether we have any restrictions in the county that they live in regards to the OFSO?
That's a good question. You would have to ensure that you are zoned for this activity in order to implement this license. So that would be with your municipal office. And then they would just do the land assessment to see if you're within the correct zoning for slaughter.
Okay.
Because it does involve gunshots too, right? And so we do get reports that somebody's shooting animals. I don't know what's going on over there. So do make sure that you have that approval.
Okay. So can somebody buy a steer off my farm for their consumption and pay me just for the processing?
Oh, sure. However you work that out, absolutely. You mean like, would they take it home and slaughter it there and then bring it back to you for processing? Sure. You can process on your OFSO, again, as long as it's all back to that one customer, because it's not inspected, right? So just keep your side of the street clean in that respect.
Is there a time frame from when you sell the animal to your customer, who then becomes a producer, from then when you slaughter?
The only time frame is in advance. So, and with larger animals, it kind of makes sense, right? You know that the animal sold before you slaughter it. But for instance, chicken producers, say you're slaughtering 350 chickens. Every one of those must be assigned to somebody before it's slaughtered. Because if it, rather than filling your freezer with 350 carcasses and then just selling them off as you get customers, because that is the sale of uninspected meat. So and it doesn't have to be complicated, the agreement that you have. It can be an email, it can just be a bill of sale, it can just be an order form, and then you sort out your pricing after, depending on the rail weight of the animal, or how much it ends up, however you price it. It's entirely up to you. Just have that agreement in advance. They don't have to pay in advance. Just have that agreement in advance.
How do you know you're getting your meat back when it goes to another facility?
Well, that is a relationship that you would build with your farmer, right? So that really depends, like anywhere that you go. I'm sorry, I guess are you talking about one of the licensed facilities, perhaps? It's trust. It's between you and the facility, or if you are providing the processing and the meat for your customer, then it's that relationship you have with your customer, which is the nice thing about the smaller on-farm operations, is you are able to establish those relationships and your customers come back. So it's trust.
Okay. Can the slaughter of poultry be done with a knife and cone and no stunning, or do you have to apply for the SW or the non-SWS?
No, that can be done with the cone. Yes.
Okay. Again, is there a list of all licensed mobile butchers somewhere?
Yes, that's also on that directory that we have, that you can filter for the mobile butchers and the mobile butcher facilities.
Okay. If you take an animal to an inspected facility to be killed, can I take the inspected carcass home to cut up into steaks or hamburger or jerky and sell it?
You can sell it if you have a mobile butcher facility or an Alberta Health Services permit. You can't sell it if you're processing it under your on-farm slaughter operation, because that facility is not inspected. The other two facilities are inspected, and all three pieces of inspection are required to sell the meat.
Are chicken feet considered edible offal?
I guess it depends who you ask. I don't eat them myself, but that if they're eating them and they want them back, then yes, of course they can take them.
So if they do a butcher shop operation, do they then get federally licensed and federally inspected? They're just wondering, as they do things as a collective, so they have a collective farm ranch operation and slaughter.
You could, and you could, and that would enable you to sell the meat outside of the province. If the meat is federally, if the slaughter is federally inspected and the processing is federally inspected, then you can sell outside of Alberta, you can sell outside of Canada. The requirements, the regulations are very high. It's quite an expensive regulation to implement. But if you go with the provincial, then you can sell within Alberta, anywhere in Alberta, in food service, in retail, wholesale, or direct customers. So that's the difference between the federal and the provincial system, is where you can sell it, selling it outside the province or within.
So just for clarification, so somebody buys an animal from off the farm, they can both slaughter and process it for their own consumption with the OFSO.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Can a slaughter be performed in an open-sided shed without being considered an abattoir?
Yeah, you can build, protection from the weather. If it's snowing or raining, you can have a little roof, or if it's windy, dusty, you can build wind breaks, but not, not a 3 or a 4-sided shed with a roof. That would then become a building, and then you'd have to go the whole distance with that and have the abattoir operator license.
So to verify, a gunshot is classified as stunning.
Yes. Yes. Before the animal's bled out.
And I guess just for clarification again, can somebody buy a steer off my farm? Can I slaughter it and process it for them for their own consumption? That's the purpose of the license, right?
That's exactly it. Yes. They can share that steer with up to 4 if it's more than 227 kg. But yes.
And the processing can be done inside, but the slaughter is outside.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. So I guess there is another question. Where do you go for the license itself? So you just apply through the website?
Just apply to the website. You can apply online, and then it's all processed and it's emailed to you. You'll get your notification, and then you can print it. We don't send out a physical license anymore. If you have trouble with the website, then you can contact me and I will email you one that you can either print and mail in, or you can scan it and email it back to us, depending on. Sometimes I know that in some areas of the province, the online doesn't work very well because the internet speed isn't fast enough. So if that's the case for you, just get in touch with us and we'll find a way to get you the application.
And for the links that were in the presentation, I can send those out in a follow-up email tomorrow for everybody, which will also link to where you get the license. So
perfect.
Is the weight requirement based on live or animal weight, rail weights?
Live weight. So it's just an estimate. You don't have to actually weigh the animal. It's just an estimate.
Okay, I think we've made it through all the questions. That was very rapid fire. Does anybody have any other questions that they want to quickly type in? Now's the time. You have access to the expert for all clarification.
And I'm totally available. I'll give you my phone number, okay? They don't like it when we include it in the, but it's on the website. So I don't know why I couldn't include it in the presentation. My phone number is 403-422-0406. Again, it's 403-422-0406. Sometimes it's easier to just phone and discuss your situation than to try and type it all out and get everything, back and forth, back and forth. So if you'd rather phone me, by all means, I'm completely available.
In the Q&A, they typed food safety classes. I'm assuming they're asking, are there available food safety classes?
No, we don't provide any training, and there's no training required. Alberta Health Services does offer a food handling course, and they have one that's specific to meat handling, mostly processing it. It's not slaughter because they don't permit slaughter. So you can look on the Alberta Health Services site for that slaughter training. And then of course, Olds College has the slaughter, or I'm sorry, that processing training, the meat training. Olds College has the slaughter training. Satan Nate Lakeland College has the processing training. So there are places that you can go for. Sometimes they have weekend, or they have the full on meat processing training as well. But we don't provide any training at Alberta Agriculture,
okay,
and Forestry Rural Development.
When you're applying for the license, do you need to put in your legal land description?
Yes, it asks for that. And your PID, premise identification number. There's also a place on the website that you can request your PID if you don't have it. And I think that's all based, I've never actually done it, but I think it's actually based on your land description.
Awesome. If you move and you have the license, can you just adjust the legal land location?
It's not transferable, unfortunately. So you would have to contact us, and I guess a decision would be made. Very rarely is it transferable. If it's just down the road, you might have a case, but you would probably have to reapply and have a new license issued to your new location. You might have to pay again.
Do you need a slaughter and process certificate for the OFSO license?
No, no training is required. This legislation, we call it outcome-based legislation, where we're really looking at the outcome rather than telling you prescriptively, this is what you need to have the license. All we say is it must be done in a safe and sanitary manner, meaning safe from an occupational health and safety perspective, as well as safe from a food safety perspective, and it must be done humanely. So we're looking at safe and humane slaughter and processing. Meet that outcome and you're good. There would never be a complaint. There would never be an investigation, and very likely then never an inspection.
So when you apply and you receive the license, is it 1 year from when you get it, or does it run calendar year?
From when you get it. Yeah, 5 years. 5 years, $100 for 5 years.
What is the compliance and enforcement consequences of selling uninspected product?
Compliance and enforcement principles is that's how the investigation team operates. Those are their guidelines that they use. So if you were selling uninspected meat, the first thing they would do is educate you, and so that you fully understand what the regulations are and what your obligation is and what you're accountable for under the regulations. They would help you understand what inspected meat is versus uninspected meat. And then if there's repeats, then it's escalated to the point where eventually there would be fines. There have been jail time with repeat offenses. First time, they just want to make sure that you understand. So that's the educational component of the compliance principles.
Awesome. Do one last call for questions.
There's some really good questions, I must say. Thank you. It keeps me on my toes.
Seeing that there are no more coming in, I want to thank you so much for joining us. It was very educational. Hopefully it's helped out a lot of people to decide if they want to apply or not, or how it could benefit their operations. So I definitely want to thank you and thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. If you want to rewatch it or anything like that, and I will send out an email with the links, as well as a link to rewatch this if you're so choosing. So yes, thank you. And
I'll send
have a
that to
wonderful
you
day.
right away, Kelly. I'll send you the information.
Okay. Well,